One where yesterday we were learning about we brought up this topic of doing work before mincha, and some of you wanted to know what the prohibition exactly is, and I mentioned to you that nowadays we go to shul and we're sort of more lenient, and that is correct. But if you want to know what the specific rules are, they're brought in chapter 232 of the Shulchan Aruch. In chapter 232, it mentions that a person should not go to have a haircut before mincha, and near the time of mincha, until he davens. He shouldn't enter a bathhouse. He shouldn't enter a place where they tan leathers. And he shouldn't go into judgment, and he shouldn't start a meal. So these are the 5 things that it prohibits before mincha time. And one of the reasons for the haircuts is because you have to imagine the olden days. If the scissors broke, most people did not have an extra pair of scissors. And they would have to fix their scissors, and you would be stuck there waiting while they're fixing their scissors or going to buy another pair of scissors. So it would cause you to miss mincha. The same thing applied or similar things to Bursiki, this place where they would tan leathers. If you got stuck in the middle, if they realized something was going wrong, you didn't want to let it wait. You would want to get involved and fix it, because otherwise you could lose. It could cause there could be damage that will have a long-term effect and won't be able to be fixed later. So you'd get very involved in anything that you find is wrong. And the same thing is like a judgment, that once you start the judgment, you have the people there, the witnesses, and people are starting with their claims. And to leave it would, you would want to keep on going. You're very involved in what you're doing. And so one of the commentaries, the Meiri, he brings down, he says some of the Mefarshim, there are commentaries, he says, that write that the only prohibition of work is things that you don't do half. Like, for example, certain things you like to finish on the spot. And that's where these prohibitions apply. You don't do a half a haircut. You don't do anything that, with tanning, you have to finish it. You want to finish it. And things that wouldn't want to stop in the middle, those are things that are prohibited, and other things could be permissible. So that's one leniency, that it only applies to these specific type of things. And therefore, we do know that most people work and they don't stop to daven mincha early, and they don't stop their work and wait till they're going to daven mincha. But but there are other views that imply that this should apply to all types of work. It shouldn't be done from the time of mincha. Could you close the door because the noise? Thank you. So that is so that's from the letter of the law. The leniency that it's brought in the Shulchan Aruch is if you have a shamish, like a gabbai, a person who's the synagogue helper, who runs around the community and screams out, "Time to daven mincha, time to come to shul for mincha." So if you have such a, what is that called?
I think shamish.
Yeah, shamish. But I don't know what the English translation of it is. But you have someone who helps out, arranges, organizes things. The activist of the shul activist, comes running around and tells everyone it's time, screams, makes announcements with a horn, and says mincha time. So then you would have a leniency, because even if you're in the middle of doing something, but now you have that alarm clock that is waking you up and telling you to come daven, so that would be a leniency. Again, we don't seem to be careful about this law. The world in general is not so careful about this law, and there must be a reason for it. So in the olden days, the reason was because they used to have in the Jewish communities, they would have this shamish that would go around and and tell people it's time for mincha, and he would make a sound, a siren type of noise or whatever, and scream, trumpet.
Is that the person that's the non-Jew?
No. This was a Jewish person who was part of who was the activist of the show.
Really?
Yes.
To knock on the windows
In New York, before Shabbos
We got
comes
a lot of
in,
people speaking. 1 second. Let's Ezra speak first. Ezra?
Yeah, I know. I heard stories about the shamash in the morning would go and knock on the windows or on the what do you call it? Just to remind people that it was time to come to shul for shachrit. So.
Right. Okay. So we have such a concept. At least it was maybe in like the Lower East Side when everyone lived in the in that area. I don't know nowadays if you have it so much, but
I know I heard it about in the shtetls. That's what
in
the
shtetl, right? Okay. Yes. Moshe, you wanted to speak?
No, I was just saying in New York before Shabbos comes in, the horns blow.
Right. They have a siren. Right.
In New York?
Right. Yeah, they do have a siren that goes off.
Siren
Crown Heights does. I think Borough Park does now. Yeah. You haven't been there in a while, Ezra. For Shabbos.
No, I remember the ones in Yerushalayim, 40 minutes before. That's
yeah.
That I remember.
So anyway, that is the leniency that it seems like people used to rely on. Nowadays, they struggle to figure out what the leniency is, why people work until right until the time for mincha. So, one leniency is what it says in this, what we just brought from this Meiri that brings some of the commentaries, that it only applies to work that you really can't stop in the middle. That's really where this applies. It doesn't, you're in the middle of building a construction, and you can't really stop in the middle. You have boards on top of you, but you're holding things up and you stop in the middle. I don't know. I'm just giving an example, but I don't know. I'm not into construction. I'm just, it applies to things that you can't really stop in the middle. So that would give a leniency to thousands of other positions, where it's not an emergency for you not to stop in the middle and keep track of everything that you're in the middle of. So it would give room for people to be lenient for other types of work. That's one leniency. Another leniency that it seems that they bring is, the other leniency is what I mentioned yesterday, is the fact that we go to shul, a person who goes to shul regularly, so they rely on the fact that they are not davening now, and they always go to shul, so they will remember to go to shul as well. But the person does mention that this leniency doesn't apply to a very festive meal. If you're in the midst of going to a wedding, this leniency wouldn't apply, because the wedding or a bris, it gives an example where you're having a long meal. So Suda Gedola, the term is a large meal. We're afraid that person might get drunk, and therefore he should daven before. That's why. Press the button. That's why a person wouldn't be able to rely on the leniency of the fact that he normally goes to shul. So it uses an example: Sudas Nesuin, Bris Mila, Pidyon Aben, Sheva Brochos. All of these things. You drink wine. You could, you shouldn't start a half hour before mincha. Now, this is a discussion in itself. Which mincha are we talking about? I mentioned that there's two minchas. There's a mincha gedola and a mincha ketana. The earliest time a person can daven mincha is mincha gedola, which is 12 and a half hours. I'm sorry, 12:30, which is the time of 12:30, 6.5 hours into the day. That is the earliest time for mincha. However, well, I shouldn't say earliest, because really the earliest is noon. We don't rely on that, because the rule is you're not supposed to daven mincha till a half hour after noon, because we're afraid a person might make a mistake and daven too early. But the earliest is truly noon, but that's not the appropriate time to daven mincha. The first appropriate time that the Chachamim issue said person can daven mincha at is 12:30, and that was the earliest time they would bring the sacrifice. on a rare occasion, they would bring the sacrifice that early. Like if Erev Pesach fell on Erev Shabbos, they needed time for everyone in the Jewish community to bring the Paschal offering. So they would bring the sacrifice, the afternoon sacrifice. They would bring it early, but otherwise, the other time of mincha is 9.5 hours into the day, which means like 3:30. So either 12:30 or 3:30. One is called mincha gedayla, a large amount of time for mincha. The other one is called mincha katana, which would mean a shorter amount of time for mincha, which is from 3:30 until sunset, and 3:30 on an average day. Yeah, it's not exactly 3:30, but the proper time is 9.5 hours in the day. This is not 1 second. Take these. Okay, sorry about that. So the leniency is that we rely on the fact that a person normally davens mincha. But what that means is, if someone doesn't normally daven mincha with a minyan, so in addition to not davening with a minyan, which is an issue if he lives in a community that's close to a minyan, besides that, there is going to be an issue for him doing work if he doesn't daven mincha. And this would apply during COVID, for example. During COVID, when everyone is, when people were not going to shul for, almost a year, people until Shavuos, like from Purim till Shavuos, basically, people didn't go to shul, and the rule of davening early would have applied. A person should daven right when the time for mincha comes. And again, the question would be, when does that really apply? Does that apply from right at half hour afternoon, mincha gedayla? Or does this mean you shouldn't do any work after mincha katana? Obviously, so it comes out that there's different views. But if you want to, be lenient, you could rely on the mincha katana view, which means that once 3:30, approximately 3:30 comes, you shouldn't really be doing work until you daven mincha if you're not planning on going to shul. And the other option is to hire someone, not hire with money, but you could ask someone to remind you. It's called a shomer. You have a shomer, a person who you tell that I am going to, I'm appointing you to remind me to daven mincha. So if you have a shomer, that would be another leniency of doing work, and this person will remind you to daven mincha before the time comes. So these are the laws about davening mincha, not doing work before mincha. And again, it doesn't, for a lot of us, they don't really apply. We don't normally go to have a haircut or go to a tanning place or so on. But number one, it's not a regular thing. And,
Rabbi, I'm confused. Are you talking about davening 4 times a day? In the morning when you first get up, then the 2 minchas, and then in the evening, or is this? I'm confused.
Okay, it's not that there are 2 minchas. It's not 4 times a day. It's 3 times a day. 2 times when mincha is appropriate to daven. 2 opinions, or two times when mincha would have been prayed. One option is to do the earlier time, and the other option is to do the later time. But it's one mincha, and that really is based on the sacrifices. There was the norm when they normally brought the afternoon sacrifice, and then there was the random, the once in a while time when they would bring the mincha sacrifice. Once in a while they would bring it earlier, but the norm was to do it later. So you have those 2 times as times for mincha. Okay.
Either one or the other is what you're saying. Either at 12:30 or at 3:30.
Yeah, and I also explained that when I say 12:30 and 3:30, I don't mean exactly 12:30 and 3:30. I mean 6.5 halachic hours of the day, or 9.5 halachic hours of the day.
Okay.
My example of 12:30 and 3:30 would be correct if the sunrise starts at 6 a.m. and sunset is at 6 p.m., then it would be exactly 12:30 and 3:30. Because
Okay.
those days it would be an exact day of 60-minute hours. Okay. Now we are in the Gemara, and let's go over what we learned yesterday. We learned the brisa where we learned that there are two views what's the source of the prayers, Shachris, Mincha, and Ma'ariv. We mentioned that one opinion is that the tefillos were established by the patriarchs. The other opinion is the tefillos are established corresponding to the korban, to the daily sacrifice. Now, we're not talking about all the sacrifices because there were many people would bring all different types of sacrifice. The person sinned, they would bring their sacrifice. The person wanted to give a donation sacrifice. We're talking about the Talmud, the daily obligatory sacrifice of the community that the community would bring, that it was brought for the purpose of the entire Jewish people. There was a sacrifice in the morning and a sacrifice in the evening, and those two in the afternoon, late afternoon. Those are the two daily sacrifices that the prayers are corresponding to, and then the night prayer was going to correspond to the parts of the sacrifices that were not burned during the day. They correspond to the sacrifices that were the parts of the sacrifice that was not burned during the day, that would be corresponding to Ma'ariv, the night service. So that now we're going to go to the next Gemara, and the next Gemara is Betanya Kavased Rabbi Shua ben Levi. It's really smack in the middle of the page. It's like maybe about 25 lines up from the bottom of the page. But Tanya Kavased Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. We have a brisa that follows the logic of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Now, I should clarify, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is really considered an Amoira after the brisa. So the brisa is really first. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi mentioned this point, but it's really based on a brisa. And this brisa is the source, is a statement where Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi's statement fits with this brisa, because this brisa is more the original of a source to the point that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi made. And what is this point? That mipnei ma amru? For what reason did they say tfilas hashachar ad chatzos, the morning prayer goes until noon? Shaharei, because Tamid shel shachar karav ha'ilech ad chatzos, the morning sacrifice would be brought until midday. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, and Rabbi Yehuda says, he argues, ad arba sha'os, until 4 hours of the day. Shaharei, because the Tamid shel shachar karav ha'ilech ad arba sha'os, the morning sacrifice would be brought until 4 hours in the day. So we've got the two opinions of the rabbis. In Rabbi Yehuda, what is the source of their opinions? One says until midday, and the other one says until 4 hours in the day. The source of their opinions is because the sacrifice, they argue about when the sacrifices were brought until. The opinion that says you could daven shachris until midday is because he holds that the sacrifices were brought until midday, the morning sacrifice. And the other opinion says, no, the morning sacrifice was specifically ended by the 4th hour of the day, and therefore, he says that you can only daven until that time. And why is the mincha service until erev, which we translated as either meaning shkia, sunset, or later, possibly the end of sunset, the 58.5 minutes until after the regular sunset, until dark. So why is mincha only until that time? And the reason is because of the sacrifice, the afternoon sacrifice. Sha'arei, because Tamid Shabbein Harabayim, the Tamid of the afternoon of the Karev was brought, Vahile, continued, Ad Ha'erev until Erev, till the time of evening. And Rabbi Yehuda argued, and he said, Ad Plaga Mincha, you have until halfway through Mincha. Shaharei, because Tamid Shalbein Harabayim, Ad Plaga Mincha, the afternoon sacrifice was only brought until then. So if someone asks you, you learned the Mishnah, and the Mishnah said you can only daven Shachris until 4 hours of the day, according to Rabbi Yehuda, what's the source? Why does he say only that? The answer is because the sacrifice was only brought until then. I'll ask you, what about Rabbi Yehuda says you can only daven Mincha until Plaga Mincha? What's the source? Why can you only daven Mincha until halfway through Mincha, which is dividing the time of Mincha in half, and you only have the first half for Mincha? Why? What would the reason be? So you'll say very simply, it's based on the sacrifice. The afternoon sacrifice had to be brought was brought always before Plaga Mincha. That was when it was finished being brought. Now, now we're on the third wide line. Why do we say the night prayer, Myriv, Tfilas ha'erev is another word for Myriv. Why is Myriv ein la keva? It could be recited all night. Why do we say, why is there no limit? There's no deadline for Myriv. You have all the way until the next day, until the next morning to say Myriv. Why? Shaharei, because Evarim upadorim, the limbs in the fats, shaloi nesachlu miba'erev, that were not consumed from the evening, krevim v'hoilchim kol halayla, they were brought all night. So this is the source of Myriv. Myriv can be recited, the night prayer can be prayed all night. Why is it prayed all night? Because the fats would be brought, and the limbs, they would be brought on the altar any time of the night. They were brought. Now, why was Musaf, the Musaf prayer, the extra prayer for the holiday, Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, Yom Tov, all the holidays had a Musaf sacrifice? Why? Why do we have all day? Why is there all day to bring those to recite that prayer? The answer is because the sacrifice could be brought all day. Because the sacrifice of Musaf could be brought all day, therefore we can pray the Musaf prayer on these holidays. We pray it all day. Rabbi Yehuda says, Ad Sheva Shos. You only have until 7 hours of the day. Why do you have only until 7 hours of the day? Because the Musaf prayer is brought only until 7 hours. So Yehuda says that the Musaf was only brought then. Now, what is Mincha? When we say half of Mincha, so we got to know what time Mincha is. So when is Mincha? When we say there's the half of Mincha, so the Gemara is asking, what is Mincha? So, ve'ezoi Mincha Gedoyla. What is Mincha Gedoyla? The Gemara answers, Mishei Shoysu Mechza Ulamayim. From 6.5 hours and onward is called Mincha Gedoyla, the large Mincha. Ve'ezohi Mincha Katana. What's the smaller Mincha, the small Mincha? Mitesha Shoysu Mechza Ulamayim, from 9.5 hours in the day and onward, which we gave an example of 3:30 on a day that's 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. In other words, sunrise is 6 a.m. and sunset is 6 p.m. So the 9.5 hours of the day will be 3:30. And that is called Mincha Gedoyla, the shorter amount of time of Mincha. Now the Gemara asks an interesting question. And I touched on this when we learned the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda says half of Mincha. You have until half of Mincha to daven Mincha. What does he mean? Plag Mincha kama kama or plag Mincha achreina kama? Does he mean the earlier Mincha or the later Mincha? And the Gemara answers, Tashema, Come and listen. The Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Eimer plag mincha achreina amru. He means the later mincha. And so what this means is Rabbi Yehuda said that you have to divide mincha in half, and only the first half you can daven mincha. What is this? What is the Gemara's question? Which mincha are you going to divide in half? So let's say you divide the big mincha in half. So it's 12:30, 6.5 hours in the day. You've got 5.5 hours left of the day. If you divide that in half, and you'd say only the first half of those 5.5 hours you could daven mincha, and afterwards you could daven ma'ariv. So what would come out? What time would that be? You have to make the calculation. 5.5 hours divided by 2, but divided in half, is 2 hours and 3/4. 2 3/4 hours times 2 would be 5.5. So 2 3/4 hours from the end of the day. If you subtract it from the end of the day, or you add it onto 12:30, so you add 2 hours on 12:30 would be 2:30, and then 3:15, right?
Right.
3:15 would be half of the mincha gedayla. And let's make sure if you subtract 2 hours and 45 minutes from 6 o'clock, it would be 3:15. So 3:15 would be the proper time. If that's right, mincha gedayla, you're dividing in half, it would mean 3:15. What would be if we're talking about the later mincha, the 3.5 hours, 3:30 would be mincha katana. So let's say you have 3:30 till 6 p.m. There are 2.5 hours of the day. That's called mincha katana. From 9.5 hours until the end of the day is mincha katana. And that, if you divide that in half, you have 1.25 hours. So you're going from 3:30, you're adding 1.25 hours, it'll be 4:45. Or you could subtract 1.25 hours from 6 p.m., it'll be like 4:45. So the difference, according to the one way of thinking, half of mincha would mean Reb Yehuda says you can only daven mincha either until 3:15, or he means you can only daven mincha until 4:45. Now, 3:15, I must say, would be quite early. So we know that it obviously means the second one. It means 4:45, not 3:15, because there is that would be making early Shabbos really early. Imagine if you made Shabbos Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock, the daven mincha. There's no such thing. That's so we know from practical purposes that the Gemara's answer is obviously the end, means the later mincha, means the 4:45 one. 4:45, that would be early Shabbos, 4:45. And which it means 1.25 hours before sunset, which means that we're talking about plaga mincha, we're talking about the second mincha. Again, let me just clarify. There are 2 options of what mincha means, and we want to divide them in half and say the first half, Rabbi Yehuda says you can daven mincha, the second half is for ma'ariv. Which mincha are we talking about? There's a mincha called mincha gedayla that's 6.5 hours into the day, and there's a mincha that's called mincha katana, which is 9.5 hours in the day. Which means mincha gedayla means you have 5.5 hours left of the day. Mincha katana means you have 2.5 hours left of the day. Which one are you going to divide in half? The 5.5 hours left of the day divided in half, or the 2.5 hours left in the day divided in half? And the Gemara's answer is that it's the 2.5 hours that you divide in half, and that is the answer. It comes to 11 hours minus 1/4, which means 10 hours and 45 minutes into the day. That is the time of Plag HaMincha. And now that it's Friday, if any of you are making early Shabbos, now you know the calculation. If you are planning on davening or making early Shabbos, because Shabbos is so late, the calculation would be a halachic 1.25 hours before sunset. So sunset is approximately 8 o'clock, and an hour, a halachic hour nowadays is approximately 66 minutes. So 1.25 hours would mean 66 plus about 17. So it would be 66 and 17 would be 83. So about 83 minutes before sunset. That would be the earliest time to start Ma'ariv. Approximately that amount of minutes before sunset, you would be able to daven Ma'ariv then, and you would daven Mincha before then, and then you could actually have your Shabbos meal not end at midnight like it is in my house. You could actually end your Shabbos meal at a much earlier time. Okay, everyone, have a wonderful Shabbos. If anyone has any questions, you're welcome to ask.
Good Yom Tov.
Have a good Shabbos. A good Shabbos. Isaac, you have a question?
I had a question. There were no karbanos brought before the morning Talmud.
Right.
All they did was clean out the ashes in the mizbeach and prepare the wood to start bringing karbanos.
Right.
And the Talmud was the first karban.
Right.
Was the afternoon Talmud the last karban? I know they burnt a murim and everything afterwards. But as far as karbanos go, I believe the afternoon Talmud was the last karban offered.
You are correct. The only thing is the Pesach offering. There is such a
right. Pesach
other than that,
they were in their ankles in blood. I know, but I'm saying
other than the Pesach offering, you're 100% right that it was the last sacrifice.
So if we're talking about the earlier mincha time, so then the mizbeach was open from 7:30 a.m. to 2 p.m.
Right. It wasn't that much time, you're saying.
Generally, it was an early afternoon, and people, nobody came in to visit. But I'm saying that the activity involved with the karbanos, the shechita, the bringing them in, the cleaning up, the shoveling afterwards, was only until early afternoon.
Right. Especially according to Rabbi Yehuda.
Right. So it was a nice, quiet afternoon. I mean, maybe the Levium was singing a little bit, but besides that, you could think.
I mean,
sounds of karbanos. You have animals being let in. Okay, the lemmelach don't make much noise, but the ayil or the shar makes noise and makes dirt. And then you have shechita and cleaning and cutting and bringing. This was a busy place in the morning.
Right.
But
so you're wondering about the afternoon. It seemed like they ended early. I would say it depended on the winter or the summer, because in the summer, Shkia is 8 o'clock.
Longer hours. Right.
So give or take. So according to the Chachamim, the Talmud Shebein Harabayim was brought until Erev. Rabbi Yehuda would say until whatever 6:45. You know what I mean? So Rabbi Yehuda's opinion would be a little earlier, but it's still more than a regular day. In other words, it's not like a 9 to 5 job.
I'll tell you why